He's playing in the background. The flour, he's playing in the background. Okay, so I'm going to make some of my sourdough bread, and I'm going to go through the process pretty quickly, and I'm going to pause and start and pause and start. But so here we go. And I can also email you the recipe, but if you get a pen and paper, you can write down the recipe as we go along. And? So this recipe is going to make 2 large loaves of bread. Do you have that loaf, or did she come?
She came.
Okay. I had one, but we ate it. So it makes 2 large loaves of bread. So if you only want to make 1 loaf of bread, then cut it in half. All right? But I got the 2-loaf recipe memorized, so we're going to go ahead with that. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have your starter, okay? And here's my starter. It's nice and bubbly. It started out about here in the cup. Actually, it was, right here. And look where it is now. You'll notice that it has just started to drop slightly from its height, and that's when you know the starter is right. The other way you know is that it floats. So the way I like to test it is I take water that is slightly warm to the touch. So it makes it about, 98 degrees. You want the finished dough to be around 80 degrees, and the flour is probably around 60 something, 70, depending on your house temperature. So we start out with warm water, and that gets the yeasts going. So you'll need a total of 3 cups of water and 1 cup of starter. So what I do is I start with 1 cup of water here, and then I put my 1 cup of starter in, and if it floats, you know it's ready. So see, the starter is floating, so that means it's ready. So we just put 1 cup of starter in here until it goes up to the 2-cup line. All right, so there you go. That's 2 cups, and I put that here in the bowl. And then I put in the other 2 cups of water. And that gives me 3 cups of water. Now, a lot of the recipes you'll see online ask you to weigh your ingredients. So what I did was I weighed the ingredients, and then I measured them and came up with measurements, because most people don't have a gram scale. For those of you that do, I'm not going to ask you what your side business is. Okay, so now that we've got the water in here, what we're going to do is we're going to stir it up so that the starter is distributed evenly in the water. All right, and all broken up. You don't want too many clumps. All right. I will do another video on how to get a starter going quickly. There are a couple of cheats that will guarantee you get a vibrant starter in a couple of days instead of waiting a whole week. Okay, so now that I've got that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2.5 cups of white bread flour. If you don't have white bread flour, then you can use all-purpose flour, but you'll need a little bit more flour, because just a little bit, maybe a 1/4 cup more, just to give it some more strength. So there's 2.5 cups of white flour, and then I'm going to take some whole wheat flour, and I've got some organic. Doesn't have to be organic, it just so happens to be this time because it was on sale. So I've got 1 cup of organic wheat flour, and I take it back. It's 5 cups of white flour. I'm sorry, I had cut the recipe in half in my head by mistake. So I had put 2.5. There's 4.5. There's 5. So 5 cups of white flour and 1 cup of wheat flour. I'm going to pause. All right, so here I'm mixing the dough with a spoon. All right, it's all going to come together, and it's going to be a little lumpy. All right, I'm going to pause again until it's done.
Oh, Should we clean
Oh,
it
shoot.
up?
Okay, so I just went through a whole explanation and found out that the camera was paused. So I've mixed the dough. It's nice and sticky. It needs to be sticky. What we're going to do is let it sit for 45 minutes. It's going to hydrate the flour. It's going to allow the flour to absorb the moisture fully, and that will give us the ability to work with the dough, and it'll start the gluten development process as the enzymes and things in the starter start to work its magic, and the yeasts are going to start eating the proteins and start to create the gas that gives us the holes in the bread. So here we go.
Okay.
Oh, I'm going to cover it with a plastic bag and let it sit for 45 minutes, and then we'll be back. Have a drink. Okay, well, now that you have a drink and the flour and the auto lease is happening, I'm going to give you a little pointer on what you can do with the starter. Because once you have the starter, before you feed it, you have to either discard it or make another batch of bread. And typically you have more starter left over than you need for another batch of bread, or that you need to feed, right? Because you should only feed it with a little bit. So what I've discovered watching somebody else's video like this is that you can actually fry the starter, right? When the starter's nice and ripe, you can fry it up into like a flatbread. So what I do is I take a little bit of olive oil in a hot pan, put a little oil in the hot pan like that, let it get nice and hot, not over too high a heat, okay? And then, now this starter came out a little stiffer than I normally make it, so here we go. We're going to take the starter. The oil is hot. We're going to put it in the pan. Normally the starter is a little wetter than this. And I'm going to take one of my favorite things and sprinkle it on top of the starter. All right, so that's a little bit of... All right, well, I touched something, and so this is video number 2. So here we have the starter frying on the pan there, and I've got the starter, and I've got some everything bagel spice. I'm going to put a few green onions on top as well. Okay, so I've put some green onions, chopped up green onions, some seasoning, some salt and some pepper, and we're now going to flip it over.
No, we don't do it anymore. Flip it.
Oh, look at that. That's beautiful. All right, I'm going to fry it about 3 minutes on either side on medium heat, and that way it bakes all the way through. We're going to have an awesome starter flatbread.
Little boys.
Okay, here we go. There it is. Isn't that beautiful? So we're going to go ahead and depan that, and then we're going to give it a cut. And this has got a nice kind of chewy kind of center with the salt and the seasonings on top with the olive oil. It is so yummy. We're going to let it cool down just a little bit. All right, let's go talk starter. Okay, so now when you feed your starter, you should always start with about 2 tablespoons of starter, which we call the mother, right? And then we're going to mix a cup of water in and stir it all together so that it's evenly distributed. Then we're going to go ahead and feed it. And I feed it with 2/3 of a cup of white flour and 2/3 of a cup. I'm going to put this over here. How's that? Okay. And 2/3 of a cup of wheat flour. and then stir it all together. And this should give you a nice pancake batter texture of a starter. It shouldn't be too stiff and it shouldn't be too runny. It should be somewhere in the middle. Okay? Terrific. Now, starters can be stiff and starters can be liquid. This happens to be somewhere in the middle. A stiff starter will give you more acidity and more sourness. A wet starter will give you more extensibility. And the extensibility gives you an inner crumb that looks like this, right? That's the finished product. So we're looking for extensibility. You get a nice crust, you get a nice interior crumb, right? A nice color on the outside. That's what we're looking for. So that's why we're using a liquid starter. So now this starter will sit out for 11 hours and then it'll be ready again. If you want to wait a few days between bakes, then you would let the starter rise for 11 hours and then, or 8 hours. Then you could put it in the refrigerator for up to a couple of weeks. The longer you wait, the more times you have to feed it before you use it. Okay? Once your starter is really going, then it'll come back quickly, but you need at least 2 feeds if you're letting the starter sit more than a week. It'll sit like this for a couple of days. You can feed it once and then it'll be perfect. All right, here we go. We're going to pause again and we'll come back when it's time to mix the salt and the water into the auto lease dough. Okay, my phone died and it went off. So here's another video. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next stage of the bread. We got the dough. It's been auto leasing, which means it's been sitting without the salt so that it can ferment freely and start to get some gases going. Now we're gonna, I'm gonna wash my hands after this. Now we're gonna go add the salt and a little more water to dissolve the salt, and we're gonna mash it into the dough. So I'm gonna go wash my hands since I just touched my face. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. All right, now I've got clean hands. Did you hear me sing? Okay, so now we're going to add salt. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a tablespoon of salt, which is about 20 grams. All right, tablespoon of fine salt. Going to sprinkle it over the top of the dough. Now listen, you're going to see all kinds of videos online. You should look at a lot of these videos, and they're all going to be a little different. They all work, right? So here we go. A couple of tablespoons of water. All right, supposed to do 20 grams of salt and 50 grams of water. I'm going to go a little heavy on the water because I made the dough a little stiff. All right, so now I'm just going to grind it, I'm going to squeeze it, right, and get it in there. I'm going to make sure, right, there's a couple of different techniques. All right, we're just going to mix it all in there. Okay. Okay. Now, this is, see, we're got a little bit of the gluten development, not much. This dough could actually tolerate a little more water. I'm just going to put an extra splash in there. Just because I like the dough to be nice and wet, it tends to pop up better that way. All right, this dough is nice and sticky. All right, there you go. So now, go ahead and take all the extra dough. There it is. And now I'm going to cover it up and let it sit another 30 minutes, and then I'll be back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do fold, stretch, and fold. Once every 30 minutes, we're going to do a stretch and fold. And if you want, go to YouTube and look for stretch and fold sourdough techniques. There's a bunch of videos on there. But I'm going to do it in a second. All right, here we go. Okay, we're going to do a stretch and fold. I got this amateur camera set up because I'm an amateur with cameras. So I washed my hands. I dried them though. I'm going to get this one wet. Okay, so now there's all kinds of folds. There's a one-handed stretch and fold. There's a two-handed stretch and fold. And then there's this one which I've never done before, but I saw it online. I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to do what I always do, which is a one-handed stretch and fold for the first couple, right? So here's how it works. You take one hand, and there it is. And you go, you just got to loosen up the dough, right? And what you want to do is you want to get under the dough, so you get it in the middle, and you want to stretch. You want to lay it over the middle, okay? And you turn it a quarter turn, you get back up underneath it, you stretch, and you fold it down, right? Get up in the middle, and you stretch. You see how much gluten development there is in that dough? We haven't done anything to it. It's just sitting there. So you get back under there, and you stretch, and you fold. Now it's already starting to keep some shape, right? And there you have it. So we're going to do that 3 more times before we let it sit for a while, and then we're going to shape it and put it in baskets. And I have a special treat for you. And I don't know if you noticed, but I've got all the cheapest materials here. I got a plastic bowl. I got plastic measuring spoons. I got all this at the Dollar Tree. Guess how much each piece was? You got it, $1. So I got a bowl for $1. I got the measuring spoons for $1. And then I got these really cool little red baskets that say Betty Crocker on them. And they kind of look like a sieve or a strainer. But I use them as the baskets instead of a Benetton, which cost $17 a piece. Guess how much they were at the Dollar Tree? $1. All right, I'll see you in a minute. Okay, folks, here we go. We're going to do another stretch and fold. Got to get my hand wet. All right, just a little bit of water. You could do oil, but water's fine. You'll notice the dough is starting to get a little smoother. Let's see if I can point it down a little more here. All right, so we're going to do it again. We're going to loosen it up. Just loosen it up around the edges. All right, so it loosens up. And we're going to stretch and fold it down. All right, turn, stretch, and fold. Stretch and fold. One last stretch and fold. The dough's starting to get a little smoother, starting to hold its structure a little bit better. And so we have 2 more of these to go. And you'll notice that the dough gets smoother and smoother and smoother every time we do this. And that's developing the gluten structure. It's also, you're really starting to develop the crust as well, because the outside of this is going to be the outside of your bread. So you want to make sure that you're being consistent with it. And also all the pockets and holes in the bread are going to come from consistently doing your stretch and fold. So, all right, we'll see you in another, well, we do this 3 more times. I'm not going to bore you doing this 3 more times, but on the last one, I'll show you how smooth it is. All right, here we go.